Welcome, everybody. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are tuning in from. We're so glad you're here. We're coming at you live in New York City. This is Spirit Matters, your daily Bhakti Center podcast, bringing ancient wisdom into our everyday lives. And I'm here with the Chuta Gopi. Normally, we got Kishore Chandra. He's not able to join us this morning. So, just the two of us with our live studio audience, and super, super glad that you are here. How you doing, Achuta?
I'm good. It's a
She's
it's
doing
a
good.
full moon day.
It
That's
is a full moon day.
yeah. I blame moon sensitivity.
Blame
Like what we
moon
call Kishore.
sensitivity. Got it. Um, that's why you need certain friends in your life to let you know the moon cycles. Otherwise, I'd have no idea. All right. We made a decision that we were going to center this podcast around the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. And so last week we were just kind of preparing ourselves by discussing our relationships with the Gita. And this week we've begun reading the introduction of the Bhagavad Gita that was translated and commented on by Srila Prabhupada, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. And he has an introduction that sort of sets us up to put us in the mood of the Gita, a little bit explaining about what it is and how to approach it. Um, Before we get there, do we have any announcements or things we need to say or share?
I think we're good. I'm good. It's a
She's
full
good.
moon. That's my only announcement.
The full moon, that's the only announcement.
People
All
beware
right.
of your emotions.
Well, it's a long introduction. We haven't been reading the whole thing. If you have a copy of the book, I mean, you would need this specific copy of the book in order to follow along with us because it's introduction of the verses. You can find it online at Veda Base. If you just search Veda Base.
Dot
Um,
.io.
what's that?
Dot .io.
.io. What is .io?
I think they ran out of .com things, to be honest, and I think that they started using other
Other things. Yeah, they're gonna run out at a certain point.
yeah, I think they did. I think they ran out of domain things.
They
That's
ran
what
out
I
of
got told by tech people. I don't know if that's true or not.
tech people. Okay, got it. So we're reading this introduction here, and a lot of the introduction that we've been discussing this week has been about um, how we approach and the mood in which we approach something makes a big difference because and this is where like sort of the receiving of spiritual knowledge, the process of receiving spiritual knowledge. So we have this idea of when we learn something materially. I want to learn about physics, I want to learn about engineering, I want to learn about math, I want to learn about a particular skill or a trade. We just have to just learn it. You just read it, you study it, someone teaches you, and it's assimilating information through the mind, through the brain. But when we come to spiritual life, the assimilation, it's not just information, but it's realization. And this word will be used oftentimes throughout the Gita, this distinction of the words gyan and vigyan. So gyan means knowledge, which is just like a transference of information. It's like you want to put information on a hard drive, you plug in your hard drive, you drag and drop the file over, and it just takes time to download, and it's just a transference of information from one vessel to another. That's gyan. That's just I know something, and you can speak something without necessarily having a realization of it. This is why sometimes it's when someone is going through pain or suffering and you just try to give them advice, it can come off as insensitive or doesn't land well because it's like you're coming from a place that you may not have ever experienced what I'm going through right
Yeah.
now. You know, you don't have the frame of reference in your life to understand what it means to be in this particular body, in this particular racial background, in this particular circumstance, to have lost family or whatever it may be. And so um, sometimes you need somebody who's gone through something that you've gone through in order to hear from them, because it's not just information, but it's a place of realization that allows a depth of understanding and connection. And so this idea of realization is this word that Krishna will use as vigyan. And so it's how do I get realization of what's being said here? We're going to have all these spiritual truths shared with us that you're an eternal spirit soul, You're not the body. There's a higher spiritual reality. There's a higher spiritual source, a divine supreme person that we all have an eternal connection with. And all of these very spiritual truths. And Srila Prabhupada in the introduction is prepping us that I don't want you to just like any scholar, any academic, anybody can read and even memorize the entire Gita. You can memorize the entire Gita, but still not necessarily know it as a realization. And so how do I get to a place of realization where even the simplest of truths have a profound impact? You don't need to know much. You just need to know it very deeply. And so Srila Prabhupada's whole introduction is preparing us in this mindset to not just flip through it, read it, that was great, next. You know, I memorize all these verses, look how much I know, but
Mhm.
it's about how much have I imbibed, and then how much of it am I taking it into my life and applying it and allowing it to transform the way I see things, live, and treat other people. So that's kind of like the spirit of this introduction and why we're taking some time to go through it.
I like that point about fully realizing something. And I was just kind of looking up different definitions of the word realize just to see if like because we talk about spiritualizing everything, right? Making taking whatever is mundane and causing it to become spiritual. And this idea of realize, taking something which is theoretical and then causing it to become real, fact, concrete, something
Mm.
substantial within our lives.
Did you just make that up, or you've thought of that before? The real lies to make something
That
real.
was something I was just thinking of just now when you were speaking, and I was like, actually, is that on the right? And is that on the right path? And it is. It is
Wow.
the definitions of this word to realize, to cause something to become concrete, to really actually make something
I'm
real
gonna give
within our
that a
lives.
star emoji on my screen.
Thank you. And I think it's so important, as like you said, when we're speaking about it, we have all of these theoretical ideas and spirituality and all of these lofty uh, theories. But is it actually real? Are we actually making these things real in our lives? Or are we still just kind of reading it and going along and just like, yeah, so I enjoy that Srila Prabhupada encourages questioning, but also making a test. He's always the one saying, well, try it. Try it for a month, be consistent, really actually give yourself to this process, and then see what it does for you.
Hmm.
And so it does become a science.
Totally, totally. And I think that I love how you mentioned it in terms of a science that there are things that we can do that lead us to a place of realization. Um, and as long as we do them in a certain spirit, and I mean that's why the first sentence of the paragraph that I'm going to read now, it's if you're reading along, it's down a ways. I don't exactly know what page it's on. But Srila Prabhupada opens this paragraph. Therefore, Bhagavad Gita should be taken up in a spirit of devotion. That line in and of itself, it doesn't just mean when it's interesting. It doesn't just mean that devotion is just however you feel. Devotion is expressed through a willingness to follow a process that's
Yeah.
been set out for us. Devoting myself um, to a process, to a scientific method that's been laid out for us. And Prabhupada goes on to continue. He says, one should not think that they're equal to Krishna, nor should they think that Krishna is an ordinary personality or even a great personality. Lord Shri Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead. So, according to the statements of Bhagavad Gita or the statements of Arjuna, the person who is trying to understand the Bhagavad Gita, we should at least theoretically accept Shri Krishna as the supreme personality of Godhead. And with that submissive spirit, we can understand the Bhagavad Gita. Unless one reads the Bhagavad Gita in a submissive spirit, it is very difficult to understand Bhagavad Gita because it is a great mystery. Now, when I read that or when you hear that, it just sounds like, okay, here he is trying to push God on me in some ways, or why are we saying Krishna? and all this. Okay, now here we go. Here's the dogma. But what Srila Prabhupada is actually saying is that this is what the book is telling us. The book is telling, Krishna is speaking, Bhagavan Uvacha. There will be verses where Krishna later on will express that there is a higher supreme reality. There is a higher supreme truth. I am the source of that supreme truth. I am that supreme person. And so Prabhupada's saying that if you really want to get the most of the Bhagavad Gita, you can't pick and choose what feels right. You can't pick and choose and leave out the whole premise of the whole thing. And so if you're going to try to approach it, he says, which is interesting, an interesting invitation, he says, at least theoretically, just do an experiment and try to accept it as it is. And so, if you think, wow, there's all this wisdom, there's all this teaching, there's all this practical life application, take that. But also don't forget the fact of what Krishna is saying about himself and where it's coming from.
Hmm. I kind of feel like he's also bringing in a point, like, but also don't reinvent the wheel. When we
Yeah.
get into a physics class and the teacher begins telling us about gravity and all of these things and Newton, and he spent all this time, or even you hear about astronomy, and there are these people that have spent so much time figuring out the workings of the universe. We are not sitting in astronomy class thinking, you know what, this is total hogwash. I am gonna go and redo all that for myself and see it for myself. There are very few people who are doing that. There might be a couple, but there are very few people doing that. The majority of us submissively accept that somebody else has done all that work. And now we are able to accept that theoretically, at least, and then pick up from where that left off
Mm,
and continue our learning from there. And I feel like Srila Prabhupada is saying it's the same here with any subject. And I feel like, with that idea of, okay, here's the dogma, here's all this stuff, especially that word, it's like, here submissively. And then everybody gets up in arms, like, why? Why do I have to just accept and blindly and all this stuff? And I'm like, well, it's not one extreme or the other, but we are blindly accepting things every day then.
mm,
We
yeah.
don't go onto a plane and then question the pilot endlessly. Like, what are your degrees? What were your grades? How many hours have you flown? What were your assessments? And what did your achievements look like? And what do all your certificates look like? We get on the plane, we say hi to a pilot, they introduce themselves, you probably never see them, and then we go to our destination with faith.
Mm,
We're like putting our faith and submitting ourselves to things often. So I feel like here Srila Prabhupada is saying, well, why not? Why not this spirituality?
mm.
Why not also this?
Sometimes I sit in an astronomy class and think it's a bunch of hogwash.
Right? I mean, sometimes you feel like that. But that also has not caused me to go and like redo astronomy.
I don't go and redo astronomy. But I think your point is, who am I accepting as some authority of knowledge and information? If you're in a school and you're in a class, there's a sense like you're not going to get much out of this. Like it's kind of like, if you don't think this is right, then you don't have to be here. But you're coming to me as an authority of knowledge and information. Same. I love the example you gave of getting onto a plane, and I think it's, there's that beautiful verse of Queen Kunti, um, Janmai Shwar and then it ends with Fama Kinchana Gochanam, the idea of being materially exhausted in order to actually, the supreme truth is easily accessible, but only by that person who's become materially exhausted. Meaning, like, my best thinking has got me here. I've, in the introduction to Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada has this beautiful line. He says, "But there is a pinprick in society.
Hmm.
There's something that we've realized hasn't been working. And therefore, we're turning to spiritual truth. We're turning to a new way of thinking." And it's very much, I mean, I'm just thinking of, the first three steps in any 12-step program. The
Hmm.
first one is that it begins with submission. And submission begins with the acknowledgement and admittance that I've dug myself into a hole and I'm not, I'm just first and foremost recognizing that I need help, that I'm in a hole, that things have gotten out of hand, that I don't have the tools, resources, and knowledge to pull myself out alone or to figure this out on my own. And there's an admittance and acceptance of that. And then the second step is hope. But I do believe it's possible. I do believe that redemption and recovery and development and is possible. And that I believe it's only possible if I submit myself to something beyond me to actually help me out. And so it's really, Prabhupada is explaining the same thing in this one little paragraph. In
Telling
this
you, we're
one
in
little
rehab.
paragraph.
We
What's
are in
that?
we are in rehab.
We are in total rehab. We're in spiritual rehab.
We're just, we're looking at it differently, and it's absolutely true. Srila Prabhupada is saying first we have to understand who we are and what is our deficiency, what's our issues, who
Hmm.
we are and what we're meant for.
Hmm.
I'm a soul and I'm meant for something else, and I've been in this material situation for far too long. And then the next step is to have faith that
Hmm.
Krishna will help us out of this material hole. Like
Yeah.
we are literally in rehabilitation,
Yeah.
and Arjuna is actively expressing this, and he will actively express so much of this at the very onset of Bhagavad Gita. But
Yeah.
it does take, it takes genuine submissive hearing. And
Yeah.
submissive doesn't have to mean that I've given over all powers of myself to someone, and
Yeah.
therefore then they all have the whole power to hurt me. And I'm like, whoa, before we get there, how
Yeah.
about I'm just giving this authority that maybe they have a solution.
Yeah. And it's, just what you mentioned is in the very next paragraph Prabhupada reads in the introduction is it speaks to that point of being in rehab. Um, just what is the Bhagavad Gita? I feel like this phrase is going to stick for a little bit. The idea of rehab. What do you what are you doing when? What does it mean to be in yoga? I'm in rehab.
Yeah.
In total rehab, spiritual rehab. Just what is the Bhagavad Gita? Prabhupada writes in the introduction. The purpose of Bhagavad Gita is to deliver mankind from the nescience of material existence. Every man, he's using a masculine gender pronoun here, but you can every man, every person is in difficulty in so many ways. As Arjuna also was in difficulty in having to fight the battle of Kurukshetra. Arjuna surrendered unto Sri Krishna, and consequently, this Bhagavad Gita was spoken. So there you have that first and second and third step, that idea of admitting that things aren't working
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then being willing to submit myself in a place where I feel like help can be found. Not only Arjuna, he writes, but every one of us is full of anxieties because of this material existence.
Mm.
Our very existence is in the atmosphere of non existence. It's quite a sentence. Our very existence is in the atmosphere of non existence.
Yeah.
Actually, we are not meant to be threatened by non existence because our
Mm.
existence is eternal. So we are existing as eternal beings, but yet we're living and floating around in this temporary landscape of things constantly changing, trying to hold on to things, lamenting the past, worrying about the future. And it's creating this cacophonous condition of the soul being tossed around by the waves of material existence, and it's just bewildering and it's exhausting and it's anxiety riddled. Prabhupada writes, but somehow or other we are put into asat, means that which doesn't exist. And interestingly, these exact words, sat and asat, eternal and temporary, will be used in the very first instructions that Krishna gives in the second chapter of the Gita about the
Mhm.
nature of the soul and the nature of our existence. And so Srila Prabhupada is just mentioning that, like, this is the purpose of the Bhagavad Gita, which is to help us get beyond this state of being a eternal spirit soul dipped in matter and having to deal with that. But it begins with the admittance and realization that something's not working. There's a pinprick in society. And I'm coming here to this spiritual knowledge because I'm 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 willing to accept that there's a higher reality that I don't know about, but I want to be exposed to. And in order to do that, I have to trust, or I have to some purposes theoretically accept the authority of Bhagavad Gita in order to really get the most out of it.
And at the very least, the acceptance that it seems as though someone has found a process that is working.
Mm.
And even if I can't even grasp the entire process,
Mm.
I can at least come and hear about it.
Yeah.
Same thing in a 12-step program. Somebody has found a process that works. And it does work because, as we can see, these really good steps are able to be transposed even within our spiritual lives.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the final point we'll have here before we get some takeaways from Kimberly is that, you know, the idea of God is a tricky one for a lot of us. Um, and Srila Prabhupada is just kind of, and it's interesting because Krishna himself in the Gita doesn't even start to get into the topic of God and um, mentioning himself as such until later on in the Gita. Like he gives it a little time to warm up to that idea, but Prabhupada just comes right out in the introduction. It's like Krishna's God, just letting you know.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. And you know, Srila Prabhupada is making this point of the idea of if you appreciate a teaching or you appreciate a lesson, and then somebody tells you where they got it from, and you're like, oh, I don't believe that. You're sort of dismissing the teaching itself.
Mhm.
Why would I be so averse or resistant to accepting where something comes from? And I
Yes.
think that so much of today's, resistance, we use, the words God or religion or spirituality, is that we want the teachings without acknowledgement of the source. And Prabhupada, right here in the beginning, is like, you're not going to get the most of the teachings if you don't acknowledge the source.
What's interesting is wanting the teachings without acknowledging the source is a way of thinking that had previously been adopted by demoniac living beings. And not
Demoniac
demoniac like
living
Satan
beings.
worshippers, but they were
Satan worshippers, the lizard people.
they were they were
Who
actually
on this Zoom? I figured out why people don't have their cameras on the Zoom because they're
oh no,
lizard people.
there's too many of them.
Oh,
But there were actually a race of people who were
lizards.
classified as demons, and the only thing that made them the only thing that really made them demons was this idea that, yeah, I want all of these things and all of this great information and teaching which leads one to a higher, more uh,
Mm,
opulent way of living, without acknowledging the source, without
that,
acknowledging that this came from this higher person, and without having to submit themselves to the authority of that higher person. So it's really kind of fascinating to
mm,
try and look at. And I feel like Srila Prabhupada is really at the beginning trying to, like, okay, look, like you said, I'm just going to put it out there. There is definitely there is a God, there is a higher spiritual source. Get comfortable.
mm. Lane says, I'm definitely a lizard person at 6 a.m. Oh, Krishna, we love you guys. Thank you. We are at our time today. We keep it short and sweet. Kimberly is our taker awayer. We would love to get what are some key words, phrases that we can take away from today's episode?
Thank you. So today we're taking away that someone has found a process, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to know much, we just need to know things very deeply,
Mm,
and that
that's a
we're
good
all in
one.
spiritual rehab.
We're all in spiritual, even the
Yeah.
lizard people,
Yes.
especially the lizard people. We went off the edge today. We talked about God and lizards. Chuta's like, you guys, you got to keep it under wraps, doll. You tell me that I sometimes go off the rails.
Oh no way. Srimad Bhagavatam talks about lizard people. Just saying, Nagas.
Well, those are just straight lizards.
No, they're lizard people.
All right, can we edit this last part out of the podcast? Can we,
Yeah,
Money
they
Mundry? Can we
actually
edit this part out? Is this going
they do.
live?
They do.
Is this being broadcast?
What's really cool is what I found out through reading is some of the princesses of the Nagas. They have like they have dual forms whenever they feel like, so they'll have like lizard people forms. And some of them will have wings like fairies. Right? Okay. Nothing
And
exists
Kimberly's like, that's totally true. I saw that on Game of Thrones. I've seen it. I've seen it. Oh, Krishna, what's your takeaway, Chuta? What are you walking away with?
um, I really like that point that we don't need to know everything. We don't need to know a lot of things, but we
Mm,
do need to allow the things that we do know to hit deeply, to
mm,
penetrate really deeply into the heart, and
yeah,
also that lizard people are real.
those two things.
It's two things
Okay, got it. You need to know that deeply.
so deeply.
I am. I'm taken away. I mean, I love that point, the idea of not having to know everything, but know it deeply. And I think for me, I'm just taking it as a reminder, as an opportunity to reconnect with um, my personal relationship with God as a person. It's so much of it is just in terms of teachings, in terms of reading things and remembering things, and that idea of not knowing everything but just knowing it deeply. I think it goes back to relationship. Like you don't have to. The most meaningful part of any relationship is just having a deep personal connection. Um, and so I think that's what we're looking for. I mean, we're all looking for connection. We're all looking for meaning and purpose, and for someone to I think there was something online that I hold on, let me see if I can find this real quick. Let me see if there was something that I read or that I saw. Give me a second. I'm pulling up. We all want we all just want to know that someone will show up for us, that we are not alone. Gabby Bernstein. We all want to know that someone will show up for us, that we're not alone. And just kind of bringing that back into my spiritual life and my spiritual practice. Um, that's me today. All right, peeps. We love you. We care about you. We're so glad that you are here. And please, please join us again. We'll be back same time, same place tomorrow. Tell someone you love them. Know that you are loved. And we'll see you again soon. Bye bye.